Welcome to the FMCG Guys podcast. I'm Daniel Torres Dwyer. Hi, Christine Nicolau. How are you?
Hi, Daniel. I'm doing very well. How are you today?
Very good, very good. Wanted to ask you, Christine, how have you seen in your experience, I think you started in 2014, your FMCG career. How have you seen the role of sustainability evolve in this time frame?
It's quite interesting. I think back in the days when I started, people would talk about sustainability, but more in like, okay, let's not use that much plastic. Let's slowly start integrating a few metrics into our long-term goals. Well, now it feels like ESG is overall so intensive in every part of the agenda of the organization. So the sales agenda, the marketing agenda, they all kind of need to tap into the future objectives. And it's usually now not just on the level of like packaging or CO2 emissions, but rather communities. How do we help the planet overall? How do we do more good in the world?
Yeah, I think that it's also become something that was more, I don't know if I would say an option, but like something that was more like on the side to really be an obligation, because it also comes with a lot. I think there's been a lot more regulation and a lot more scrutiny from the public eye.
Absolutely. The regulatory landscape has changed a lot. Consumers have changed. So we know that in terms of trends that we observe, especially in Gen Z, being environmentally conscious and tapping more into the ethical part of big companies and manufacturers is definitely a big conversation across different tables and Zoom rooms.
Absolutely. So hope you're doing a repetitive task today while you listen to this, because I really recommend you listen in. We bring you a really heavy hitter when it comes to sustainability, which is great. We have Tracy, who's the Chief Sustainability Officer from Colgate-Palmolive. What are your expectations, Christina, for this conversation?
I really wouldn't know what to say here. I think it's very interesting, first of all, that there is a Chief Sustainability Officer, right? As we said, the conversation around sustainability gets more intensive and more companies start creating roles. But it's not necessarily one of the traditional roles that we expect to see in a C-suite. And it's really interesting to understand what is the approach that Colgate, what is the approach that Anne has. And what is more, I love that Anne has a background in supply chain. We know that supply chain is very tightly connected when it comes to specific course corrections that companies are trying to do in supplying their products in a more sustainable way. But as we said, the ESG agenda expands beyond that. So very interesting to see where she's coming from, the way that she's thinking, and the fact that she's not coming from communications or marketing. So she's not trying to create the story, but rather to change the infrastructure, the model, and the mindset.
My name is Tracy. I'm the Chief Sustainability Officer of Colgate-Palmolive. I've been at Colgate now more than 32 years, and across that time span, the majority of my career actually was in successive roles across the global supply chain, the end-to-end supply chain, and then more recently, about 6 years or so ago, I moved into the space to lead global sustainability for Colgate-Palmolive.
Great to have you here. And let me go a bit deeper into this. What does Chief Sustainability Officer at Colgate actually mean? Like, what are your key functions if we had to look at your JD?
Yeah, it's a good question. And it's changing all the time, I think.
I can imagine.
It really truthfully has evolved over the last number of years. In fact, when I first moved into the role, my responsibility was, I wasn't Chief Sustainability Officer yet. In fact, I became the first Chief Sustainability Officer at Colgate-Palmolive. When I first got into this space, I was leading both supply chain strategy, global supply chain strategy, as well as global sustainability. And there's certainly a natural overlap. In our program, you could say kind of grew up in the supply chain. We've been doing this for many years. And we can talk more about that and how it's evolving, along with my role. And then at the beginning of 2020, I became, again, the first chief sustainability officer, because as we built out those strategies, we realized as a company the importance, the important role that the global, we call it our sustainability and social impact strategy, plays in our business in terms of driving business value and growth. And so, and we realized how much work there was to get done associated with this sustainability and social impact strategy, which, by the way, we rolled out in 2020. It's a 5-year plan, with the exceptions of some climate targets that are longer term. So with that, I focused my career then by becoming the first chief sustainability officer on that strategy for the business. But I was actually still sitting in the supply chain 2020 to 2022. And then last year, my role moved out of the supply chain. I now report to the head of growth and strategy. And I'm now also sitting on the senior executive leadership team at Colgate. So I have a voice around the table with my peers, the head of R&D, the head of supply chain, the head of marketing, so on and so forth, which I think is really important. Again, it's an evolution of how Colgate-Palmolive views sustainability as part of the strategic drivers for the business. And so you asked me, what is my role? My role is to oversee that strategy and ensure that we achieve what we say we're going to do, achieve the targets, enable and educate people across the company, particularly senior leaders in our board.
And you've had a very interesting journey, which has evolved a lot, as you said. So your experience is mainly within the supply chain. How do you think that this journey prepares you for the role that you have now and the kind of little pivot/evolution that you've made in the past years?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I find it fascinating, actually, because if you look across many different companies within our industry sector and even outside our industry sector, the people who come into the role of chief sustainability officer come from lots of different backgrounds. Almost every background. I've seen them come out of legal. I've even seen them come out of marketing, government affairs, and so forth. So, and some come out of the supply chain. In our case, and I mentioned it earlier, our program, if you want to call it that, has been evolving for over 20 years. We have been measuring the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, energy, water, waste to landfill across our entire supply chain since 2002. So you could say that, and as we kind of began to become more environmentally compliant with regulations, et cetera, and then in the mid 20-teens, focused more honestly on climate and got SBTi targets approved and so forth. So it's really evolved in the supply chain. It's been largely driven there, as I mentioned. So having worked, my career across successive levels of manufacturing sites, and then customer service and logistics, because of course our footprint crosses all of those pieces of the end-to-end supply chain. I think that gave me a good appreciation for what it takes to drive our program. And in my last role before I moved into this work that I'm doing now, I was heading up customer service and logistics for our European division team. And each of our divisions had sustainability kind of leaders, and as a second job, if you will, as a side job. So I was this sustainability leader in Europe. So while I was in that supply chain role. So I think, again, most of those champions were supply chain people. So I maybe that answers your question, but I think that's, it was a natural fit for us.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting how and that's whole different brands that we can look into later a bit of, like the fact that you ended up in sustainability because it's kind of supply chain driven at Colgate, while other companies it would be more marketing driven, with all the question marks that raises as well at the same time, right?
Well, if I could comment on that, and maybe we'll talk more about this, but that's honestly kind of where we're going next with our program. We are trying to, now that I'm reporting to the head of growth and strategy, so we are trying to more honestly or authentically integrate it and embed it into our business strat plan, which of course has the brands and the enterprise-wide value proposition. But we feel that we're at a level of maturity where we can start to do that in an authentic way. And of course, everybody's concerned about greenwashing, green hushing, and all of that. But we want to build on, again, that 20-year foundation. So that's kind of where we're taking our program next. I would say we're at the early stages of that.
Interesting. And going into a more personal note, Dan, I know that, you mentioned that you were based in Europe. We know that in corporate America, there's not that many executives that take the leap of going to the other side of the pond. How did that experience shape you? How did it help you be the leader you are now?
Yeah, I mean, I feel very fortunate. Again, I've had a long career at Colgate, but we are a truly multinational company. We sell our products in over 200 countries around the world. We're organized geographically by division. So we have 6 divisions, including Hill's Pet Nutrition, which is its own division, but are geographic in nature. And for your audience, our 4 core categories are, of course, oral care, which is our biggest category, home care and personal care products, which are more regional brands in nature. Europe would be like Sanex, and in the U.S. we have Irish Spring, for instance, and soft soap. And then the pet care category. So this matrix of 4 categories and geographical divisions, I've been very fortunate to have had the opportunity to work across those different divisions, even living in Asia, living in Europe, and in the UK on a separate occasion. And during those different roles, working across all the 4 categories. And I have done work with Latin America and, of course, the US, and now I'm in a global role. So I feel very fortunate to have had all those experiences. And I think, leading up to the truly global enterprise-wide role that I'm in now, I think it was a fortunate foundation because I know people in all those different parts of the world now from those experiences. So my role really requires a lot of negotiation and influence. I joke that that we have this sustainability and social impact strategy, that I'm the master of none, keeper of all. So I have to really work with a lot of different people across the business. So yeah, having lived and worked in Europe, Asia, UK, it's been a very fortunate experience for me.
So it's a combination of having the experience of different cultures, different divisions and products, as well as building the global network, which comes very much in handy, I guess, right now.
Yeah, exactly. So, that's very well put.
And Anne, you have sustainability in your title, and nobody is going to be surprised by that, because I would say that now we expect almost every company to have something of sustainability in their agenda. So here comes kind of like the tough question, right? In your opinion, having seen that from the inside, why is sustainability important for the business now? And how does it influence the company culture when it's being taken seriously into the agenda and into the strategy?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, and there's probably multiple ways you can answer that. So let me touch on a few key points. I mean, certainly there's the obvious increase in complexity and regulations that are out there that that are important and needed, frankly, and certainly always level the playing field, if you will. But beyond that, I mean, I think the way we look at it, and there is, as everyone knows, or most people know, particularly in the U.S., this ESG quote unquote backlash, politicization of it as well, and which is unfortunate. But Colgate and most of my peers that I talk to kind of are, I don't believe that's slowing us down, so to speak. We focus on what we call sustainability as opposed to calling it ESG. And we see that this work is important for a number of reasons. First and foremost, if you look at the impact of the key issues, you start by doing your materiality assessment and you understand what are the key issues, ESG issues related to your business. How you manage those issues as a business, as an enterprise, creates both opportunities and risks. So we certainly, first and foremost, have to manage the risks. So as an example, certainly climate, it creates a huge risk because of the potential impact on force majeure of our suppliers and, steady flow of materials and packaging that we need. So how do we, and even water stress, we have some sites in water stressed regions and we need the water to produce or to make our products. So these are all risks that we have to manage. And then there's opportunities as well. And there's a great opportunity to take some of the water out of our products and compact or concentrate our products, which position ourselves to use less plastic, to engage with our consumers and help them understand that it's a lower carbon footprint. So there's both risks and opportunities. And there's reputational risk around our plastic packaging. I can go on and on with the risks and the opportunities, but how we manage that and tackle that, I think, has a huge impact on our business. And that's why we've recognized it as one of the drivers in our business strategy and how we manage that and how we build more sustainable products into our innovation stream, and then leverage that to talk with consumers. So then the second piece, which is the consumers and even our own employees, the many stakeholders that we work with. But two of the most important are the people who use our products and our employees. And we know that the younger generations, millennials, and even more so the Gen Zs, are making decisions based on what companies are doing, how they're showing up, are they authentic to their purpose, how they talk about their products, how they design their products. We see that, we hear that, and our own employees now more than, I think we tip the scale, half of our 34,000 employees are millennial or younger. So they care, they care about, and when we hire people, they care about what we do and what we stand for and make decisions based on that. So, there's multiple different answers to your question, but those I think are some of the most important ones.
Yeah. And actually going further to this, I mean, you kind of pointed in that direction. What are the main topics on your agenda? What are the main priorities of Colgate when it comes to sustainability?
Right. So for companies and you mentioned most companies, I think, do have there are different levels of maturity, but do have some focus in this space. And the right place to start is to do something, what we call a materiality assessment. And that helps you to map kind of what is most relevant or important for your business versus what is most relevant and important for all the key stakeholders that you engage with. So then whatever shows up in that, let's say, proverbial upper right-hand box is really where you need to prioritize, because there's so many things you need to work on, but you need focus at the same time. So for Colgate, just maybe a word on how our strategy is laid out. And if anyone's interested, they can go to our public website and go see it there. It's Colgate-Palmolive.com. It's on the first click on the top page. But we have 3 ambition pillars. We call them driving social impact, helping millions of homes, and preserving our environment. And under those pillars, we've identified what we call 11 actions and then close to 50 targets that sit behind that. Those 11 actions, the way they weren't by accident, those 11 actions are the ones we've selected based on what's, in that upper right-hand box. And even beyond that, we really try to focus further to say, where do we really want to lead? So I can give you kind of the top 3, if you will, where we really lean into and want to be known as leaders. And so under social, driving social impact, we have a flagship program called Bright Smiles, Bright Futures, which is, it's a community driven program. So that would fall under the help children and their families thrive in our communities action. And it is designed to help bring oral health and hygiene and education to children in underserved communities around the world. And to date, we've helped 1.6 billion kids, and we have a target to reach 2 billion by 2025. This program's been for 30 years, so that's why we've been able to, and we have a very, robust way of tracking that, I would say. And the way we can accelerate to get to 2 billion by 2025 is because of the new tools that we can leverage around digital. And under the other 2 areas I want to highlight where we want to lead or where we're trying to focus our resources, time, money. One is around eliminating plastic waste, and one is around climate. And we punch above our weight in climate. We've had our net zero carbon by 2040 targets approved and interim targets approved by SBTi. Plastic is a place where I would say, really, really trying to lean into. We're part of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation Global Commitment, which means we're committed to all of our plastic packaging being recyclable by 2025 and reducing our virgin plastic by 1/3 by 2025. And those are not easy targets to achieve, I can tell you. But we are, we're committed, and we're working toward that along with many of our peer companies. If you stop to think about it, all of our products come in plastic packaging. So we consider that really a big risk, but also an opportunity, as I said before.
Yes, having that balance of risks and opportunities and how you manage. What I love and what I'm hearing on is that, there are all very ambitious targets. But at the same time, it's not just about doing less harm, for example, eliminating plastic, but also doing more good on the way that you're reaching out to help the communities. And I do find this very inspiring and a really great way to approach overall the social impact that you've also put there in your agenda. When we asked you about your role, you said that what you do is essentially enabling and educating people in your company, essentially, especially senior leaders. So I guess Big 30 comes with a very big list of stakeholders. Who are the main people that you're working with to move forward with your sustainability agenda?
So we've talked a lot about, Colgate employees, whether it's senior leaders, board, or all employees, all cross-functional employees, in fact, which I consider one of our most important stakeholders. But one of the things I love about my job now is it is across my whole 32 years, probably the most external that I've been. And I would say, 50% of my time, rough figures, I spend with external engagement. So working with key partners, because this is, it's cliche, but true that no one company can do this stuff alone. So we have a lot of NGO partners. We have trade association type partners like the Consumer Goods Forum. I just got off a call with the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, which is another CEO-led program, consortium, if you will. So many different partners that we work with externally. And then, of course, there's a lot of investor pressure. So investors are key stakeholders. I engage a lot with investors as well now, more and more every year, I would say. And And finally, our retailers are very important. So we're a supplier to, global retailers around the world, including Walmart, Amazon, Carrefour, companies like that.
Any retailer has Colgate.
Yes, we do. Yeah, that's true. Our toothpaste, our Colgate brand is the highest household penetrated brand in the world. So even more than other common names. I won't name them, but anyway.
Common name where Christina works would be one of them. Do you work
Possibly.
Do you have to work much with like governmental institutions or like I don't know, like international bodies like the UN or?
So that's a really interesting question. So for Colgate, because right or wrong, we're not an advocacy lobby-driven company. That's just been our policy from the beginning. That doesn't mean that we don't think advocating where it makes sense is not something that we should do. We just do it in a more creative way. And we just talked about groups like Consumer Goods Forum, even WBCSD. We tend to work through, I would say, trade associations, et cetera, to influence. We do not have government affairs people. We don't have anybody in Washington. We are a U.S.-based company. So we don't typically engage directly with governments. We do a lot of work, however, with the United Nations. We are part of the United Nations Global Compact, which isn't, but again, that's how we try to influence and drive change. And we find that works for us.
So when it comes to external stakeholders, we've mentioned different partners, which are mostly organizations, associations. What about other companies? Because we've established that all companies have some common goals. Do companies collaborate? Do they come together?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. We call it pre-competitive collaboration. And and I haven't been in this space a long time, but over the course of the last 6 years, and if I talk to peers even before that, the level of pre-competitive collaboration has definitely escalated almost exponentially, I would say, as this heightened awareness of climate change and reaching that 1.5 degrees, we know that has to happen. So, and I think that's exciting. And yes, we have to be very careful of the FTC and antitrust and all of that. But I do, we all joke because we go to many of these meetings, and I think we all have the antitrust statement memorized by now because they always start with that. But so some great examples of that are the Consumer Goods Forum. So I'm on, which is, for those that don't know, it's a large CEO-led, board-led organization. I use the term trade association. It's not exactly the right term, and it has over 400 member companies made up of both retailers and manufacturers. And there's, it's again, a CEO board-led group, and they have a number of coalitions. I think it's about 8 coalitions focused on different topics like plastic waste, like deforestation, human rights, and such. So we are members of most of those coalitions. So on any given day, and we have lots of meetings, we will meet with our peer companies, our peer manufacturers, including our direct competitors like P&G and Unilever. We'll also have good opportunity to interact with Walmart and Carrefour and the retailers that are our important customers. So we do that. Another neat example of collaboration, we're part of AB InBev, started something called the Accelerator 100 Plus, which is intended to foster and support startup companies that help across a number of sustainability issues and help companies like us to achieve our targets, because we know new technology and startups will be important to close some of those targets. So they focus on everything from plastics to human rights to engineering solutions, climate, across all of those key issues. So they call this again the Accelerator 100 Plus. So they started this with the intention of bringing some other companies into it. So I think it's been about 2 years ago now, 2 or 3 years ago, after they had run it for 2 years, they brought on Unilever, Coke, and Colgate. So the 4 companies together have an annual cycle of reviewing startups. We usually get over 2,000 applications, and we boil it down to like a top 100 or so. And then every year we select a group of startups to work with, and we support them in a number of ways, financially, but also mentoring and kind of fostering projects with them. So we're working with Coke, we're working with Unilever on that, and sometimes we work together jointly on a project. So to answer your question, it's very important to work together. And now what many of us included, many companies now are now focused on this famous scope 3. So we have to engage with our suppliers in a different way, setting expectations, educating, setting targets. So we're working with big supplier companies as well.
Which many suppliers will be the same across the industry. So it only makes sense.
Right.
They're subject to the same standards independently who they're selling to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And the retailers are setting examples. We are the suppliers to the retailers, so they're setting expectations of us as well. So
yeah, that's true. You're in the middle between the raw material suppliers and then the retailers, right? So
exactly.
you're the ones that have to make a lot happen. What about you? So you were talking before, and we were talking like how at Colgate sustainability had been very intimately linked to supply chain, and with your own history, that's a good example of that, and how you're trying to make your sustainability efforts more linked to the commercial activity, but also to, I don't know, even market more and make them more public. How are you walking that line between having an actual impact, but also making it public, but not fall into greenwashing?
Yeah, and if you recall, I said I think it's early days. We're trying to figure that out, and because if you look across our brands, a big part of our portfolio is what we would call our core. It's the brands that have been around for a long time. It's and we're always trying to innovate against that core, and then there's opportunity to introduce new and different brands that are really kind of a departure. Maybe let's call them born more sustainable. But that's not easy to do for a big company to introduce really new and radical kind of innovation or even brand names. So we're trying to figure that out. We're trying to figure out how do we really start to embed a sustainability mindset across the innovation and brand purpose models that we use. One thing I'm excited about is we work more and more closely with our insights team, because I think it has to start there. It has to start with insights, understanding what the trends are, understanding what the consumer needs and wants are. So we're doing a lot of that work, and I think it's the right place to start. And I think our intention in the long term is to marry the great work we've done as an enterprise with how it makes sense down at a brand level. And there is some storytelling at an enterprise level to be had as well. We use a metaphor called swords and shields. So shields are the things you have to do. You just have to do them because of regulations of reputational risk, maybe even fees or taxes that are that you have to face. Swords are where we want to lead. Okay. And we believe that every brand has a sword. Every brand can't have 10 swords. You have to choose kind of one or two. So right now, for instance, in toothpaste and Colgate being the biggest brand in our toothpaste, we are in the process of making every single one of our toothpaste tubes recyclable. And we're pretty far along on that journey. It has been a journey that started back in 2015. So, that's making fundamentally making toothpaste more sustainable, or the packaging more circular, you could say. So one of the swords there is definitely eliminate plastic waste. In other cases, it might be pushing the social message of driving oral health and hygiene. So that's how we're starting to think about it.
So in order to keep authentic, you really need to be very mindful of where you're choosing to lead and what are the things that you need to do, which should be two different things and approaches.
I would say that's right. I would say that's right. And where we want to lead, we want to make sure we have a strong foundation. Mm-hmm. The authenticity has to be real, and then I think that protects you more from the greenwashing.
Mm-hmm.
So there's definitely a lot of stuff that we have discussed so far. We've established that the sustainability agenda and role is evolving and playing an ever more important and prominent role within the agenda and the network of a company. And we know that regulations are also evolving. So from your perspective, Anne, you have a 5-year strategy. How do you see the FMCG industry playing out in the next 5 years? And where do you envision Colgate being?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So it's hard to believe how quickly the clock is ticking. So, I told you we rolled out this, what we call 2025 Sustainability and Social Impact Strategy. We've already passed the halfway mark. So we're looking at how we're doing, and we made the targets ambitious for a reason. I think that's expected of companies like ours. So I'm not going to comment on exactly where we think we're going to end up at this stage of the game, but we're working hard. For all our actions, we do have these roadmaps to help us plan how we're going to get there. And I think that, I kind of feel like 2025 is already here. We're already starting to think about our 2030 strategy. And I do think, how are we thinking about that strategy? I think we're going to stick to the framework and the actions we have, but we're going to evolve them, and the targets, by and large, the bars will be raised against all of them. And there may be some new expectations coming. Like I said, for plastic, we work closely with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, and we know there's going to be probably some new expectations there. Maybe on refill or something, setting targets on refills. Just for instance, we know there's going to be even more pressure around the climate agenda. So those bars are definitely going to get raised. And I think a big topic that many companies are now talking about are nature-based solutions, our impact on nature. In fact, that's the double materiality requirement that Europe is going to impose upon us, the EU Commission. And along with that, talking about regeneration. So some new language is going to be introduced, I think. But 2030 is going to come quickly. We're pretty active, like I said, with the UN Global Compact. So talking about how to elevate the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, and really ensure that the world, if you will, achieves those alongside of all this. So I see the next 5 years maybe having companies having a bit more closer alignment to the SDGs, bringing it together. I do think over the next 5 years, importantly, I believe companies are going to be more sophisticated around their climate work and how we're going to close the gap there and get to the 1.5 degrees. More and more companies are trying to get the SBTI targets approved. I think they recognize the risks. And certainly we know that there's a lot more regulations coming from the EU and eventually if the SEC announces their disclosure regulations. So there's going to be more expectation to disclose information around climate. So I do think there's going to be a continued focus there.
So you're not going to be short of work, are you, Anne?
No. And one more thing to add that I think is really important is I think there is a growing focus on the social aspect, on climate justice, inclusivity, and what the impacts are. And we see it. I mean, you see it every day, whether it's the fires in Maui or in the floods in Vermont, to name a few recent issues. And you really do see the unfortunately underserved community hit harder in those situations, and it's tougher for them to recover. And how do we, account for that? How do we offset that? Those kinds of situations are going to just get worse and worse. So the social piece is going to, I think, also escalate.
Yeah, absolutely. And then with all the interesting experiences that you've had in your career, if you had to look back at the beginning of it, what type of advice would you give yourself with everything you know now? That's just something that we ask all guests, as our loyal listeners will know.
Yeah, I know it's a great question. And it's funny because where I'm at my career, which you can tell I'm not a spring chicken. So it's a good question. I have been reflecting on that also because I have kids that are starting their career right now. So I give them more advice than they probably want to hear at times. But, so first of all, at the beginning of my career, I could have never imagined that I'd be in the role I'm in now because it frankly didn't really even exist back then. So I had a lot of imposter syndrome in the beginning. Like I always thought I'd be when I'd move into a new role, I'd be like, oh, I don't know. I'm not sure if I'm right for this role, but every time I moved, you would find what you needed to focus on. Pick the 2 or 3 things you need to focus on and make a difference, make an impact. And that definition of what making a difference and an impact has really evolved over time. And I'm so thrilled to be in the role I'm in now because I really do feel like I'm making a difference and an impact, not just at Colgate, but outside of Colgate. So I would say always look for your purpose. It may sound cliche, but look for your purpose, look for where you can make a difference and make an impact. Everyone can make a difference and an impact at every level of their career. And it's as simple as that. Just figure out the 2 or 3, you can't do everything. Figure out the 2 or 3 things you can do to make a difference.
This was Tracy, Chief Sustainability Officer at Colgate-Palmolive. Christina, what are your key takeaways from this conversation?
A very interesting conversation indeed, Daniel. I loved the language that she used, and it seems that companies nowadays kind of have the same jargon when it comes to sustainability. So we heard a lot about the swords and shields, and that's something that's not the first time I hear about it. But I really like that I see that big multinationals actively try to improve the world around them. So that's what the sword is about, right? It's not just about protecting our business or just course correcting where we're doing wrong or not doing that great. But it's about finding the opportunities where we have the space and bearing the responsibility to help our planet, the communities where we operate in, our consumers. So I really love that part, and I would love to see more of that in the conversations across the FMCG industry.
Because I think that she said, correct me if I'm wrong, so shields is basically what you need to do and swords is being proactive, no?
It is being proactive, but it's not just being proactive so that you're not going to suddenly find yourself emitting more CO2. It's more really about making the difference.
Got it.
And trying to work for the better future of our planet.
Okay, makes sense. I also think it was interesting to hear like the percentage of plastic that's in Colgate's products, right? Because of the nature of the products and how because it's toothbrushes, toothpaste, obviously inherently it's a lot of plastic, and that they're trying to really lead that change, even if they have that quote unquote handicap, no?
And I guess there is a lot of waste in the FMCG industry. It's fast-moving consumer goods.
Yeah.
And there is a lot of plastic being used, a lot of different materials that are or are not getting recycled, have been or have not been recycled or reused in the past. So definitely there is a lot more to see there. And I think it is a responsibility of each of the big leaders in each sector to lead the conversation and lead the agenda. And it's something that we also touched a little bit upon with Anne, the fact that multiple companies are working in that direction. Should there be a level of collaboration? And that's something that I would also like to see more of in the future. I understand that there is some work that's already happening. There are also a lot of trade associations, for example, that bring companies together. And this goes beyond competition. This goes beyond market share and even category growth. This is really somewhere where the true leaders need to show how they're going to make a difference and lead that difference in a collaborative way.
Yeah, absolutely. I also thought it was interesting that she said sustainability, there's two main forces that are pushing that effort, which is one, regulation, which is interesting, and we said it at the beginning as well. And that number two is millennials and Gen Z preferences and them being more demanding about it, no?
And I think that this is exactly why it's going to be very interesting to be monitoring how a role with the title that Anne has is going to evolve in the future. So what is chief sustainability now is not going to be the same in an environment that's going to be even more heavily regulated. The conversations are going to be even more demanding when it comes to sustainability. But at the same time, sustainability as a theme, let's say, is going to be embedded across the organization, because you will not be able to speak about your consumers in marketing and ignore that part, right? So let's say, I do believe that we're looking at different organizations in the future with different structures and completely different strategic priorities.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I think that Anne really raised the bar high. We actually want to have more sustainability leaders on the podcast to hear other perspectives. So if anyone knows anyone or is listening and wants to come to the show or recommend someone, please reach out. We'll be here to listen and to any of your suggestions or any type of feedback. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you in the next week of the FMCG, guys. Have a great day.